it's Nicole. Welcome back to another video, and today I have my August wrap up for you. Sorry this is so late. I'm apologizing in every single one of my wrap ups lately because they're all coming late. This one I had like a legitimate excuse. I've just moved and I've already filmed this twice. I'm struggling to find places to film with good lighting, so hopefully this goes. If not, sorry, please bear with me as I figure it out. I'm looking into getting a ring light, so hopefully the problem will be fixed soon. But I still really want to share all the books that I read in August with you because I read some really great ones and I really want to talk about them. First book I want to talk about is Eventual by V.E. Schwab. This is the second book in the Vicious series. I thought this was going to be a duology when I picked this up, and like as I finished it, Victoria Schwab announced on her Twitter that this is not going to be the conclusion. There's actually going to be a third book. And I also buddy read this book with my booktube bestie Desi from Pastel Pages. If you haven't found Desi, like, what are you doing? Go check her out. She's so awesome. I can't say too much about the plot of this book, obviously, because it is the second book, but it picks up right where the first book left off. And what I really loved about this book was we got a lot more characters. There were a lot more female characters that were introduced into the story, and there were a lot more powers. I will say one thing that lowered my rating for the story is huge chunks of this book where there was only a focus on one character, because there was this huge focus on one character for like 100 pages. As fascinating as it was, because we were getting a lot of character backstory, I wanted it to be broken up more into other characters, because I did find my mind wandering and wondering where these other characters were. And I think I gave this a 4 stars, but it's probably like a 4.25. I really enjoyed it, and I really can't wait to see what book 3 has in store for us. Next book I completed in August was We 3 Heroes by Lynette Noni. This book is a collection of 3 short stories, and it's part of the Nordoran Chronicles series. So this is the final book before the last book. It's not like a compulsory read. A lot of this book is just recapping what has happened through books 1 to 4 in this series, but from the point of views of some of the side characters. I really enjoyed this. I really adore the side characters in this. Really nice kind of getting to know more of the backstory of her friends, because even though we know bits and pieces, there is definitely a lot of detail we do not know. If you have not heard of the Nordoran Chronicles, we follow a girl called Alex who is from our world, and she travels into this magical doorway basically and comes out into this world known as Medora, and there she starts attending a school, and it's a magical school, and everyone in this world has different magical abilities. I talked about this a bit on my channel, and someone once commented that it reminds them of like classic fantasy adventure stories, like how they're originally done, like Harry Potter, and that's like the perfect way to describe this series. It's very reminiscent of a lot of the adventure fantasy stories that I read growing up, so it feels very nostalgic to read this series, and they are such quick reads. I've read like every book in one day, and now I only have the final book in the series to go. I ended up giving We 3 Heroes 3 stars. Then read The Vanishing Stair by Maureen Johnson, and this is book 2 in the Truly Devious trilogy. I did a group buddy read with Steph from Nefa Entertainment, Jasmine from Lamoto Books, and also Owl from Owl Attempts to Read. I have a really interesting experience with this series because when I first finished Truly Devious, I really enjoyed it and I gave it a solid 4 stars. And then when I picked up this book, and I only picked this book up I think a week after I finished, I didn't even remember a lot that had happened in Truly Devious, and that just made me lower the rating for Truly Devious. I really enjoyed like the friendships and stuff, but there was a lot of stuff that I was kind of overwhelmed with. So much focus on the mystery, and that was all Stevie kind of was solving the mystery. We didn't really get to know her on a more personal level, which is something I really wanted for book 2. I also felt like this book was overwhelmingly quirky, from the character names to the things that the characters were doing. There's also a character in this called David, and some of his actions kind of irked me a bit. I understand that he was going through some things, but it was just still very over the top. Most of my enjoyment of this book was the fact that I did a buddy read of it, and we just had so many inside jokes to say because of this series now. But yeah, that's kind of it with my opinions. I really don't have a whole lot to say. I ended up giving this 2.75 stars. I then completed The Devil's Fief by Lisa Maxwell, and this is the second book in the Last Magicians trilogy. I really enjoyed this series. Basically, the first book follows a girl called Esther, and she time travels back into 1902, and she gets stuck there, and she originally went back into 1902 to track something that was lost. It was like this magical book, and so while she's stuck there, she's trying to get her hands on this magical book, and there's a heist. There's a whole bunch of characters who have different magical abilities, and it's a lot of fun. This book follows the events after the first book, and so I can't say too much about the plot. However, there are new characters introduced, and I wish we got more of those characters, to be honest. I felt like a huge focus on this book was Esther and her love interest, and I wanted more from the side characters. The plot really intrigued me. I also found that a huge proportion of the middle of this book that really dragged, and I didn't think it needed to be as long as it did. I really do enjoy the world that's been crafted. I really enjoy the whole secret society thing that's going on. So I gave this 3.75 stars. In August, I also managed to complete BookTube's new darling, basically, and that is Sorcery of Thorns. I feel like everyone was reading this around the same time that I read it. And this is by Margaret Rogerson, and I also did a buddy read with this with my really good friend Michaela. I highly recommend you check her out if you haven't found her channel already. She's amazing. She does a lot of vlogs, and she's from New Zealand, and she's just so sweet and so supportive, and she deserves so much more love, so check her out. This book is a standalone fantasy, and it takes place in this world where libraries basically come alive, or at least the books in them do. Elizabeth is someone who has grown up in the libraries. She is an apprentice in hopes to one day fulfill her dream of becoming a warden, and wardens work in libraries to keep the books under control and prevent them from becoming monsters, and if they do become monsters, they fight them off. Unfortunately, at the beginning of this book, Elizabeth is found at the wrong place and the wrong time and is accused of a crime that she did not commit. She is then stripped of her apprenticeship, and she is also taken away from the library by this sorcerer known as Nathaniel. As I said, she'd grown up in the library. She had never really ventured outside of the library, and so for the first time she is seeing the outside world and society and how it is, and they have a very different way of looking at women and treating women, whereas in the library where she's grown up, she had a lot more rights, a lot more voice. This book, to me, while reading it, felt like I was watching an anime. It could be quite slow at parts, but it was just such a vivid and lush world and such a uniquely crafted world. I can't think of any other way to describe it other than I felt like I was watching an anime. It was just so beautiful. I think if you're into more plot driven fantasy with a lot of characters, you might not like this, but if you're someone who does enjoy a slow paced books that are really based on the world and just like a select few, like there's only 3 main characters and their interactions, I think you would really enjoy this. I gave this 5 stars. I think this might have been my favorite book of the month. Maybe. Apart from my rereads, this was probably my favorite book of the month. My least favorite book of the month, and that is The Queen's Rising by Rebecca Ross. I went into this book not knowing a whole lot, but I was really intrigued by, okay, let's be honest, the cover. I mean, it's stunning, but I was also really intrigued by like Queen's Rising. I really enjoy books that follow royalty and monarchs and wartime and a lot of political intrigue, and that's what I was expecting out of this book. We start off at this like boarding house, and it's a very small boarding house, like there's only like 4 or 5 girls. We follow this girl called Brianna, and was dropped off at this boarding house at the age of 10, and she was raised there, and she's now 17, and she's working towards becoming a passion. And passions is basically someone who thinks and works in the arts, whether that is dramatic arts, whether that is creative art, whether that is writing, whatever. They have this thing known as the summer solstice when they're 15, and they have this fancy dinner where all these patrons come, basically offered jobs by the patrons. That's how we start off, and then in the background there's this whole thing going on with this other kingdom where it used to be ruled by a queendom basically, and then there was a male who came along and took the throne, and now there's a king ruling it, and there's this whole thing with like secret families and like ancestral memories. I didn't like this book. My problem with this book was it felt very incohesive. We start off with these girls who were trying to work their whole lives towards their passion. That literally took like the first 130 pages, and then the entire tone of the story switches and it becomes about this like lost monarchy, how this lost queendom had to also do with the lost magic of the world, and that was really interesting, but it was just, the plot was just so jumpy and it just didn't make sense, and I found it really hard to keep up with all these secret families. Even now I'm struggling to like put my thoughts together for you because I just didn't like it. I ended up giving this 2 stars. It was just messy, it was just incoherent. I felt like there was huge large chunks of this novel that weren't necessary. There wasn't a romantic relationship in this, but there's definitely one that started forming and it made me really uncomfortable. I didn't think it was very appropriate. Other thing I would say is I really didn't like how Rebecca Ross used the word passions. I get it, like you're passionate about something, but there was literally this scene where one girl was talking about playing music with another girl and she literally asked the other girl, will you passion with me? Like, it was weird, it was awkward, it was cringy, it took me out of the story. Unfortunately, I'm going to not continue on with this series. There's only book 2 out at the moment. I have no idea when the 3rd book's coming out. The next book I'm going to quickly talk about, I didn't complete and I've put down, and I think we're going to continue at a later date, and that is We Hunt the Flame. I was listening to the audiobook of this and it was right as I was moving, and so I was packing and I was stressed and I just wasn't focusing on the audiobook, so I'm going to put this down and continue. I got to page like 300, so I got like a huge chunk of the way through the book, but I just really didn't take a whole lot in apart from the start. I really do want to read this book, and it just doesn't really feel fair that I give this book a rating or that I continue it because I just really didn't absorb it. Basically, we follow this girl who disguises herself as a hunter, and she goes out and does a bit of a Katniss Everdeen and hunts for her village and provides for her village. And then we follow a prince character who is tasked with trying to capture this hunter. And then we also have this whole mythology of the world where there was once magic in the world and that's been lost. Okay, so the last 3 books I have to talk about is Nevernight, God's Grave, and Dark Dawn. I won't say too much about Nevernight and God's Grave because these were rereads. These books are all over booktube, but if you don't know, basically it follows a girl called Mia Covere, and her whole entire family was murdered when she was very young, and it's her quest to avenge her family, and by doing this she joins what's known as a red church and becomes an assassin. I love these two books. I gave 5 stars. So these 2 were rereads and I read them in preparation for Dark Dawn because Dark Dawn came out at the end of August in Australia. I really enjoyed Dark Dawn. I have an entire reading vlog dedicated to this book, so if you've read Dark Dawn and you'd like to know more of my thoughts, I will have that linked because I obviously can't say too much here because spoilers. But I did really enjoy this. However, I do think it's sort of the weakest book in the series. I was originally going to give it 4 stars, but I think I'm going to settle with 4.5 because I still really loved it. I really enjoy learning about the mythology of the world and the origin. Mia does have magical abilities to do with shadows. In this book, we find out where that comes from and why she has it. I really enjoyed having all these characters come together and all the character dynamics. That was really fun. I just love the world. I just love the narrator, and in this book we also find out who the narrator of the story is, and I love that. I love how funny it was. I love how meta it was. I was a little bit disappointing with the ending at first, but then I've really warmed up to it and I really like it now. And yeah, I just love this series. I think it's incredible and I highly recommend that you give it a go. It's just such a well-crafted series. That is it. Those are the 10 books I managed to complete in August. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know how your August reading went, and I hope that you're enjoying whatever you're currently reading, and I will see you next time. Bye!